what the Society are trying to do is to engage with our members and try and virtually recreate the show, I suppose. I'm Nigel Jones, I'm this year's president, and not having a show has been obviously extremely disappointing. So the idea here is that can we all pretend that perhaps we were at the show, and having disappeared round the first part of the show, you've ended up at the horticulture tent, and there is that wonderful sign up at about 9:30, closed for judging. I always think that is so atmospheric, that's what's going on inside that tent. So in light of that, what we've done is we've got 3 eminent panelists this evening. Firstly, in no real order, Caddy Sitwell. Caddy is I think she described herself as a relatively novice judge. I think that's right, Caddy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But,
yeah.
but you've got your badge. You've got your badge, which is the main thing. Rachel is much more experienced judge, I think, Rachel, having been doing it for many, many years.
40 years, yeah.
So we're particularly grateful to see both Rachel and Caddy. And then we have Charlie McCormick, who probably many of you who are watching this, looking in, know who he is, but I'm going to let him introduce himself. And I think, Charlie, you're going to take over in a second.
Yeah.
Those of you who want to ask questions, could you please send them in on the Q&A icon? I will field them and I'll ask them on your behalf as we go along. So it's a very informal evening, or an hour. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. So I'll pass on now to Charlie, who I think is going to start. Charlie.
Great, thanks, Nigel. I think this is such a good way of connecting lots of people, because I know that there's probably a lot of people watching this from around the world. Plus, hopefully there's quite a few from the society members and exhibitors, so forth, or just local people watching. I think it's a brilliant way of bringing that all together. And having access to the sort of Melplash show from anywhere in the world. Anyway, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Charlie McCormick. I live in Dorset. I'm originally from New Zealand, moving over here 10 years ago. So I'll just give you a wee bit of a background on how I got into showing and why I'm interested in gardening and all of that. So growing up in New Zealand, I grew up on a farm in the South Island of New Zealand, for an hour and a half south of Christchurch. It was a sheep farm with dairy grazing and a bit of beef cattle plus some arable. Growing up on a farm in a rural community, there was a show much like the Melplash show, which has all the same things. It has a horticultural tent, it has show jumping, it has a food tent, it has animals. It basically has everything that we have at the Melplash show. So I was hugely encouraged by my grandparents to start exhibiting at our local show because they were huge exhibitors. My granny exhibited in the horticultural tent mainly, plus she did the baking and preserves, and then my grandfather showed sheep and wool, so they sort of covered most fields in the show. So anyway, I spent a lot of time with them, and was hugely encouraged to start just exhibiting small things by just taking pet lambs, which is great because you could just take your pet lamb and then lead it around the ring. And then at primary school, we were encouraged as children to enter flowers in the horticultural tent. For a start, you would just do tiny sand sources or miniature gardens, 5-flower arrangements, or if your parents grew vegetables, which mine did, you could take along 3 cherry tomatoes or something. or a couple of potatoes. And it just sort of got the children at school interested in this idea of taking things from home and competing. I mean, you wouldn't always win. So as a child, it was quite tough. But I think that's part of the learning process of the showing world, is you can't always win. So fast forwarding, I sort of did that through my childhood, and then I went to high school, and I was sort of still did shows when I was at high school. I was very lucky that my parents let me off for a couple of days leading up to the show so I could get ready, because I sort of like to do the cut flower side, vegetable side, plus I do floral art, and I do a bit of baking and sometimes preserves, but I'm sort of trying to tame that all down a bit because it gets all a bit too much, as Caddy will extend on. And then I had a couple of years off showing when I started traveling, and I came over here about 10 years ago. I just left school, worked for various people over here who run cut flower businesses and compost and all sorts of things like that. So I had a couple of years off the actual showing, and then I would go back to New Zealand and help my father on the farm before coming back traveling again. Anyway, fast forwarding a long time, 6 years ago, I met my husband, Ben, and that is when I moved to Dorset, which is where we are now. We are between Dorchester and Bridport in a really beautiful valley, and our garden is an acre on a sort of south-facing slope. So we're very lucky to be able to have that as an aspect to grow basically everything. And about 5 years ago, I was at Caddy's house, and we were just sitting around the kitchen table, probably having a glass of wine or something. And I sort of noticed on Caddy's mantelpiece that she had a whole lot of certificates and a rather beautiful pint glass of like the most perfect parsley. And I said to Caddy, "Oh, what is that?" And Caddy said, "Oh, that's the Melplash show. It's sort of like a horticultural show." And suddenly I was like, "Oh my God, there's sort of horticultural shows in England like there are in New Zealand." And then that's when it sort of, the penny dropped. And from then on in, the Melplash show has become a sort of big part of my year in the garden, and sort of, I mean, basically that's what my year is planning for the next Melplash show, plus lots of other shows which happened in this area and all over the country, really. You can go to shows just like the Melplash show, but the Melplash show is the sort of premier one of the Southwest, I think. Wouldn't you agree, Nigel? Oh.
Sorry, I was on mute on the basis the dogs are barking in the background. Yeah, I'm definitely I think a premier show in the Southwest is sort of, perhaps the south of England we could extend ourselves to. But anyway, yes, of course we are.
Yeah. And I mean, we are just a small part of that, obviously, because we're just the horticultural part of that. There is the show itself, there are whole different areas which just play a role in the big circle of the whole show, which makes it such a special show.
Oh, totally, Charlie. And the horticultural bit is fantastic, but of course there's all the other bits. There's so many different things, all of which, as you quite rightly say, go towards making it a very special event.
Yeah, no, exactly. So jumping back to when I was at Caddy's house and admiring her array of cards on her mantelpiece. So that's when I started competing at the Melplash show on a very sort of I mean, I am still an amateur, but on a very amateur level, alongside Caddy. And then that's how I then met Rachel, which was actually more recently, which was last year at the Melplash show. Rachel was judging, and then that's when I sort of bumbled up to Rachel to see if I could do some shadow judging with her. So that's sort of how we all interlink, which I think is great. But I tend to show a lot more flowers, and Caddy is heavy on veg.
Yeah, but you're hiding your light under a bushel, Charlie. You did reasonably well at Melplash last year, did you? Or sorry, not last year, the year before, as it were, in terms of veg. Yeah, no,
I mean, I'm sure a lot of you know that I'm sort of grow giant veg.
Yeah.
I mostly grow dahlias, which I'm sort of just trying to improve on every year, like you do, like any gardener. I think that's what you want to do, is improve your blooms, vegetables each year, by talking to people, getting advice, watching YouTube, reading blogs, whatever. But I mean, I'm more into the giant veg than growing perfect vegetables. Whereas Caddy, grows the most beautiful carrots, onions, shallots, which I think you're probably starting now, aren't you, Caddy?
Well, yeah, I have been getting the carrot barrels ready, which at that moment I realise I have slightly gone mad, because I've got 4 barrels, that open bottom barrels, that I fill with sand, and you have to let it settle so it's quite firm. And then in February or so, I'll sort of core out a hole in the sand with a drain pipe, 3.5-inch drain pipe. And then you take out that sand, and in that hole, through a funnel, you start filling it up. But this doesn't happen till, I'll do that in February. But and then you fill it up with compost. That's in what you plant 5 or 6 seeds in, and wait for the best one, your best seeds, and you wait for whichever one looks the strongest, get rid of the others. And then 25, 26 weeks it takes to grow a long carrot. So that's what I've got obsessed by doing. And then the getting of them out, Charlie, as you well know, is quite difficult. I used to have to, first of all, you've got the whole panic about, have you watered them enough, too little? Are they going to split? Are they going to fulfill their potential? Because you have to get 3 matching, which is almost impossible. And then you've got to get them out without breaking the whip, the delicate little root at the bottom. You can't break that. So I'd have to ring Charlie, who's got long arms, and we'd have this awful sort of wrestle with the barrel. Charlie, you get all the fronds up your nose, and it's really annoying, and your arms down the barrel, and I'm at the bottom trying to stop the whip from cracking. So anyway, it's a bit of a performance. Then, if you don't snap the whip off, you've then got these carrots that you mustn't touch with human hands. You've got to wear gloves so you don't get break the bloom. Well, not the bloom, but you mustn't damage the surface. Oh, it's a sort of traumatic but exciting moment when they come out. And then you put them in water. And then you've got to pick off all the hairs, tweezers, and then you've got to get them to the show. So it's quite a performance, but it's quite fun, because every year someone gives you another tip and you try something different, and, so it's fun. And
I know from Caddy and I talking about, because I'm obsessed by Caddy's carrots and the sort of time she puts into the preparing the barrels and choosing the best seed. But I also know, Caddy, that you sieve your soil into the each individual funnle.
Well, there's lots of people who have come up with lots of different recipes, and weirdly this year, as there were obviously going to be no shows, I thought, well, I'll try out everybody's different recipe and do an experiment, see which recipe is actually the best. And weirdly, I don't think any recipe makes a difference. I mean, the one that was just sieved compost and sand was just as good as the others with, phosphate and potash and seaweed. So I think there's a lot of fuss made that isn't, I think vegetables just grow quite well without us. If you get the right seed, they don't need so much fiddling about. So in fact, I think I reckon it was just whether they got enough sunlight and whether it wasn't this funny mix that takes hours. Proper showers mix this in a cement mixer. It's perfectly mixed, and not necessary, I don't think.
I think that'll be you next, Caddy.
Well, you never know.
I've already got a question for you on carrots. It's already one come in.
Okay.
Why are you so obsessed with growing long carrots?
Well, firstly, it's the one thing that Charlie doesn't do, so that's a start. And also, someone said to me, there's not many people in Dorset who do the roots. So I thought, well, I've got more chance of winning if I don't do if I do the roots in Dorset. So, so that's really, and also it's fun. Every year they get a bit better, you know, and they're quite splendid to see. And they taste okay. In fact, a big carrot tastes better than a mini one. So.
Yeah, and just so people, I mean, a lot of people I'm sure have been to shows like this, but you get the long carrots, and then you also get the stump-rooted carrots,
yeah.
which are the sort of almost normal ones, I guess, Rachel, would you say? I don't know.
Not necessarily. I mean, Caddy's unusual in growing the really long-rooted ones, because they, as you say, they are such a pain to get out to perfection. And so the sort of intermediate varieties where you've got a decent chance of getting most of the root out intact are the more usual ones. But to get those 3 perfect carrots side by side in good condition with the uniformity there, I mean, for an awful lot of people will have to dig up 20 or 30 carrots to get those 3, and then you're left eating carrots for the next fortnight. But there's it's I mean, I've heard of people growing carrots and parsnips who've actually done things like taking things like drain pipes, cutting them longitudinally, filling them up and clamping them together. So when they come to dig them up, as it were, you just undo the drain pipe so it pops apart, and then you can lift the whole thing out really carefully without damaging any of the root. But you've got to have a very long drain pipe to that, and you put it against the side of the house. You strap it to the side of the house.
I know you sort of see that at the Malvern show, don't you, where they have the giant veg championship, where you get the guys who grow the heaviest beetroot, the heaviest radish, whatever, which are the most ugly looking vegetables you can see. But there's those competitions where they have the longest parsnip, don't they? And I'm guessing that's how they do it. They grow it in the drain pipes.
Yes, I think so. That's the only way you could do it without digging a huge hole to get it out again.
Yeah. And Rachel, with the carrots, what are you looking for when you're judging them? Just while we're on the carrots.
Well, first of all, it's the condition of the carrot. So it's got to be, you know, looking as fresh as it can. They've got to be uniform. So depending on how many you've got, they've all got to have, you know, be of the same size, the same shape, and you've got to look for, have they got a green neck on them? You know, have they been grown just slightly above the ground, and so you've got some greening around the shoulder? Has the shoulder got sort of any kind of canker in it, or it's sunken? So it's condition, its uniformity, and then the size for the variety. Is it a good size? Is it grows and a good colour? And depending on how many you got in the show, you'd allocate points for each of those characteristics and add them up, and then see who's the winner. Generally, depending on the size of the show, you can sort of discount, you know, the 3 or 4 of the exhibitors, and then you've got the last 4 or 5 which you've got to really get to grips with in terms of looking at it and deciding which ones it can be. And it's a lot of it is down to how they were washed. If you wash them and you're not really careful, and you use something and wash them downwards, you can get sort of slight scar lines going down the carrot. So you need to wash them in a circular motion going round, so you don't get the scar lines, because you don't see the scars until they're dried. So when you're cleaning it, it looks perfect, and then when that gets in it's dry, you can see these really fine lines. So just treating it with great love and care, and that will show on the bench on the day. Yeah. And just how you arrange things on it, how you finish the tops. Look at the schedule, because the schedule is the Bible, and the schedule will tell you whether you show it with fresh tops, which some do, but most advocate 2 or 3 inches of the leaf left with it cut across, and sometimes tied with raffia. And so the presentation and the care you've taken in how you've actually prepared it can be the deciding point between first, second, and third. It can be down to that.
And do you think that I mean that's sort of similar to across all sort of well, within reason? I mean, you know the ins and outs of every single class, but I mean, it's similar to lots of other classes throughout a schedule, isn't it?
It is. Every class, there's a schedule of pointing that you can do for every vegetable, and flowers as well. And generally is down to the 4 standards, where you've got the condition, uniformity, colour and size. But for some things, they get points for different things. Like for potatoes, you get points for the shallowness of the eyes, so you get additional points for that. For things like daffodils, you get points for their poise or the texture or the type of stem they've got. So the points vary between the different plants that you're looking at. But generally, paramount is the condition and the uniformity. If you've got multiples, if you've only got one of something, then obviously it gets 100% for uniformity. But yeah.
Well, I've got a question. Rachel's come in.
Sorry, I've lost everybody.
Which a question which is related to that, about actually how a novice would understand what they're supposed to do. What advice would you give then to a novice exhibitor, having all of those sorts of things to consider?
For a novice, I would say the first thing to do is know your soil. Can you actually? I've lost everybody. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. I can't.
and we can hear you. Yeah.
That's fine, because I've just lost everybody. For a novice, look around the area you live in and see what grows. There's no point in trying to grow camellias if you live in an area where they won't thrive. You're on a hiding to disappointment. So look around the area you live in, see what grows. Visit local shows, have a look and see what people are growing. Talk to people. Mm-hmm. Exhibitors will give you more information than you want. If you talk to them, they will give you the tips you need. Some won't, but most will. They're very generous with their time and their experience, and they are wanting people to carry on the tradition. It's sadly in some areas, flower shows are becoming less of a thing than they used to be, and a lot of the people who are really enthusiastic about growing and showing are really sad about that. So they will encourage people as much as they can. So all you need to do is ask. And most towns and villages have a horticultural society, so join that. There's a wealth of experience there. There are people that are interested, people who are happy to talk, people who will help you, give you advice. So the best thing to do is to join that society and get to know your local area and what goes on there.
Yeah, I think talking, like going to a show and talking to people who are exhibiting, I'm speaking from personal experience, and I feel Caddy can probably talk from similar to people, even just people at the Melplash show. There are some amazing guys who have been exhibiting and competing for years and years and years and years, and they have a wealth of knowledge, not only on exhibiting vegetables and flowers, but also on how you can prepare your beds, what you can do to improve your soil, or what you should water, what you shouldn't water. And they just can't wait to pass on some little tidbits and encourage new people into the flower and vegetable growing world, because it's a fun world and everyone is super, super, super friendly and willing to give advice, and a lot of them even will come to your garden and tell you what you should be doing, how you should be doing it, what you should be covering, and they're not forcing it down you. They're sort of doing it in such a way that you sort of try things, and then if it doesn't work, you can always try it another way. Don't you think, Caddy?
Oh yes, it's such a friendly environment, and so and I think people are really generous, because you might be daunted thinking, oh, I'll never win, there's no point, or just give it a go. It will cost you 50p to put in a piece of parsley, and who knows what might happen. And also the other thing about if you enter a show is you get that wonderful moment in the tent with just you and the exhibitors before the crowds. So you can see what everyone's laying out, you can feel it, you can smell it, the excitement,
It's a smell, it's just that when you go into that tent and it's that mixture of canvas, flowers, crushed grass and earth, and it's just fabulous. Absolutely. Yeah. That smell it's amazing. Yeah.
And the Melplash Horticultural Tent is so beautiful. Peter Yates and his crew do such a wonderful job. There are always huge queues outside to see what people have done. You know, it's a great thing.
Yeah, there's always that slightly nerve-wracking moment of waiting to, as Nigel was saying earlier, there's this amazing sign which says closed for judging, which is there in the door. And there's that moment where you sort of want to get into the tent to see how you've done, whether it be good or bad. But you sort of got these nerves. And then when you get in there, there's this sort of like just sight of sort of cards and cups and sort of all placed beautifully throughout the whole tent on the exhibits. And there's something about that sort of adrenaline when you sort of see that you've like won a sort of, even if it's highly commended, it's sort of super exciting, because you just get that bit of card which you sort of don't get if you're an adult these days. But as a child, it was such a big thing. But getting a card like that when you're an adult, it's such a like good feeling. You feel like you're a kid again. You're just like on such a high.
You've also plugging obviously the attributes of the show. It doesn't have to be the individual things that are being displayed at the show. Of course, we have the gardens competition as well, which is run through the summer, where all different shapes, sizes of gardens enter, and that's a tremendous attribute for those people who spend their time just doing their ordinary gardening, because the standards are absolutely fantastic. I don't know whether any of you entered that, but that's a different branch, but obviously related. But of course, Charlie has.
Yeah, but I didn't win. That's the thing. No, exactly, which is brilliant, because it all sort of brings it all into one. But the thing with the show and the garden is that you're planning, like all gardeners are planning for the next season. So, I mean, I've got a couple thousand tulips, which I'm going to plant, which need to be planted, which I just keep putting off. But I've got my daffodils and stuff in for my daffodil shows, but I'm already preparing my beds for my giant pumpkins, my giant marrows. I'm sort of putting muck on my dahlia beds already, because it sort of needs to break down a lot more. While there's sort of a slight downtime, you're sort of getting everything ready for the following year, because soon enough it's going to be time to sort of start chitting your seeds and putting your dahlia tubers on heat if you're taking cuttings. I mean, a lot of people have got their probably sweet peas going, do they, Rachel?
Sweet peas in now, and shallots. A lot of people got the shallots and garlic planted now, and Japanese onions will be in. Yeah, so they'll all be going. Yeah, and you say potatoes will be in fairly soon, so you start chitting those. Yeah. So yeah, you don't have much downtime between harvesting and getting going for the next year.
No, exactly, that's right. But that's what's such a joy about it, I think. A lot of people in the past, I'm just going to touch on my giant veg just really quickly, because lots of people ask about that. I'm not sure if anyone's asking about it right now, but I'll just tell you.
Charlie, going back before you go on to that, there's a very interesting question come in related to actually what you're doing in the garden. This is Anita from Germany. So obviously we do have some international viewers tonight. She'd like to know how your garden's changed during lockdown, and have you done something different this year in preparing?
Interesting. I mean, the garden structure itself has basically stayed the same, apart from the new ginormous bed which I've dug up in the meadow, which is in preparation so I can grow more dahlias and roses for showing. But that's all very new. So that's I mean, I did try to grow a lot more veg to eat ourselves over the lockdown period, because normally I just grow the giants and the dahlias in preparation for the show. But when the sort of show started to get cancelled, I decided that I should try and grow a bit more salad, and we've got a whole lot of leeks, and we've got kale. So the garden itself, I don't think has changed that much. I've just added a few more dahlias into the mix, but yeah, no, I don't think it's changed that much. That's going to answer that question. The one thing that I don't have is a glass house. So I do all my seed starting in the windows in the dining room, just on a trestle table. But so the latest thing is this year I'm getting a glass house, which is super exciting because I can be able to do so many more things, like take cuttings from my dahlia tubers, which is a brilliant way of creating dahlias. And especially if you want to exhibit dahlias, you're able to have more control of how the dahlia grows, because a lot of the dahlias you only want sort of 2 flowers on, or 8 on, or 12 on, or so you're able to restrict how many stems there are to the flower, and then but by the end of the season you get a ginormous tuber. So hopefully that answers that question in a sort of roundabout way.
A greenhouse is the best thing you'll ever invest in, Charlie. It's a wonderful thing. And just going on from that, I think this year with the lockdown, I think so many people have found their outside space has helped them so much. It's been so beneficial physically and for your mental health to be able to get outside in your garden. And so many people whose gardens have been just that patch of green at the back have suddenly discovered them, and they've started growing things they've never thought about doing, and they've really enjoyed it. And an awful lot of people have found another side to their property that they didn't really think about before, and are really enjoying it now. And hopefully that will continue, and hopefully we can get more people more involved in more than their gardens, and take it on beyond and into local shows and try and help them carry on.
And I think that with people realizing how amazing to have a garden is and space and to be growing things, and I'd love to hugely encourage more people to just take something to a show, because no matter if you have a garden, you'll have something that you could enter in a show, whether it be in a pot or whether it be just one bloom. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, because there are sort of all sorts of different classes over all sorts of different ranges. Like there are novice classes, but I think it's just sort of supporting the society, but also enjoying it, having fun. Like if you're growing it anyway for yourself, you might as well just put it in the show.
Yeah. And the number of times you stay at shows after you've done judging, and you listen to the comments of the public coming around, and they say, "I've got better than that in my garden," and you think, well, pick it and bring it next time. You've got it there. You can do it. It's not
a sort of terrifying thing. It's just.
Anyway, before we come back to the showing, I've got a number of questions on showing. I've also got a number, Charlie, asking you to talk about your dahlias. So I don't know what you want to say generally about your dahlias, but the two specific questions were, when is the best time to split dahlias, and can you grow dahlias from seed, are two specific ones.
Okay. Anyway. I mean, Rachel, you'll know a lot on this as well. I mean, you can grow dahlias from seed very well. I mean, it all depends if you buy seed from a garden centre or someone who sells seed of a sort of variety, you're more than likely to get that variety. I mean, I know that a lot of garden centres just sell packs of I think bedding dahlias as seeds, which are mostly going to be yellow and red and the bedding colours, and they'll only grow to sort of not very high. I mean, if you collect your own seed, you're going to, and plant that seed, you're not going to get the dahlia that you harvested that seed from. It'll turn into something completely different, because basically each seed is going to be something different. Most of the time they revert back to sort of a yellow single, I would say. Rachel, do you agree?
Yes, depending on the parentage, because most of the dahlias that are grown now will be sort of F1, so they're hybrids of two different sorts. And if you're sowing the seed from those, which will have been pollinated from a different dahlia, you're going to get the parental input from that dahlia. So yourself, unless you're very careful about bagging a plant once bees have been there and you know what, or you've pollinated it yourself using a brush,
Yeah.
you're going to get a huge variety of different offspring, as it were, from your dahlias. So you're much better off, getting the slips or buying tubers from people you know who've got the right.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are breeding dahlias this way now by just harvesting seeds. And I mean, I know a lot of people that I sort of talk to in the National Dahlia Society. This is how some new varieties come into the market, because it's a very easy way for just an amateur to create a new dahlia variety. But if you're really interested in that, there's a brilliant new book come out by an amazing lady in America, and she runs a dahlia company called Santa Cruz Dahlias, and she's just brought out a book on this exact way of creating dahlias from seed, and it's brilliant. It tells you everything. And then jumping over to the tubers, I mean, I've lifted my tubers. A lot of them I'm going to put on heat and then take cuttings from. But I mean, from any time now until you plant them, you can sort of split them. But just be careful when you're splitting them, because you don't want to sort of knock off their eyes, or else you won't have anything come up.
I've got two other questions here. Well, one question and a statement, which I find quite interesting. The question is, Charlie, the attendee is saying that they love your dahlia colour choice, but what are your current 3 favourite dahlias?
Oh,
and then I'm amazed to be able to tell you we've got a viewer called Gaston Lopez who's in Chile. He's watching this
wow.
in Chile, and he says some of your spectacular photographs of dahlias are a real joy to him. So I don't know whether
thank you. That's very kind.
I don't know whether the Melplash show is well known in Chile, but hopefully it is now.
Well, I'm sure it's well known enough. What was the question again, Nigel? Sorry,
What were your 3 favourite colours of dahlias at the moment?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I mean, I love there's orange, I think if we're going for colours, which is much easier than sort of varieties. I mean, orange, red, probably, which is really weird because I've never liked red ever. Orange, red, and I'm quite keen on yellow. Very keen on yellow.
Well, that's quite a simple answer. And I've got one more on dahlias because I'm quite keen to get on to questions on lots of other things here as well. And Charlie, it says, do you leave any dahlia tubers in the ground through the winter?
Yes, that is a very good question. Where we live, we are very close to the coast, so we don't get freezing cold evenings, and because our soil is extremely free draining, we don't really we're not on clay or anything, so the water just sort of disappears. The border, which for those that aren't aware of, along the front of our house, I have a sort of border which is, I don't know how long, 50 meters long or something, 70 meters long, which is purely just dahlias. So I leave those in the ground. What I do is I cut them back so that I can still see their stalks, and then I just cover it in a layer of sort of cow mark, which is pretty broken down. You don't want to put on sort of fresh cow mark out of a barn or anything. And then that's all I do. And then I just leave them in there, and then they seem to come back every year. I mean, in saying that, every sort of 3rd year I lift them because I sort of want to change out some of the colours and I sort of want to split them up. But that method seems to work very well for me just by leaving them in the ground.
Any more on dahlias, Charlie, before we go back to one or two other subjects?
Can I just ask you, Charlie, do you not have trouble with slugs and snails?
Yeah, I have huge trouble, but because I'm sort of doing everything organically, I go out in the evenings and just pick them all off. I did have some amazing runner ducks, which I hatched over lockdown to be my sort of slug patrol, but sadly they got. So every evening I go out with my flashlight and pick them off into a bucket, and that's that. And the other thing, just while we're on dahlias, is if you want to do it organically, I put flower pots on my canes with a little bit of straw stuffed in them, and that's where the earwigs go up into the straw, because they're such a pain, because they eat the leaves but they also eat the blooms, and then you can, during the day, you can get rid of the earwigs wherever, in a field or something. But that's a very simple way of getting rid of it, like encouraging earwigs out of your dahlias into a pot.
I thought you were going to mention your rather quaint way of ensuring your dahlias get appropriately watered. I was reading an article. In a country magazine where you'd written about how you have a bucket in a certain place in your house.
Oh no, that's for the pumpkin and the marrow.
Sorry.
Which is probably an old wives' tale, which I was told by this a hero of mine, Jackie Ryan, who's a big shower in New Zealand. I'll just rabble around really quickly because I don't want to take all the time. Who told me, if you want to get your pumpkin to get bigger, you just wee on it. And I've always been quite intrigued by this. Anyway, it's stuck in my brain. So I don't know if it works or not, but every morning you basically wee in the bucket, and then I take the bucket out and I tip it on the roots of the pumpkin and or the marrow, and that gets split between them. And it's just a crazy method, but it's quite a good way of using the wee to fertilize the pumpkins and the marrows.
Very, very good for compost heaps as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've got a question. There's a question here for Caddy. She was talking about growing the long carrots in the drain pipe. Is it the same technique the questioner asked for leeks? And what other vegetables could you grow in a similar way?
I've never tried, well, I did try once to grow leeks. It's very difficult. They do them in proper growers do them in drain pipes. But the carrots, can I say, you only use the drain pipe to core out the hole. They don't grow in the drain pipe because they get to, they wouldn't be able to absorb enough water. So you just use the drain pipe to make the hole. Then you put the compost in that. Leeks, yes, people do grow them in drain pipes, but I've never done it. But to get that perfect blanche, you want the leeks, you want a set of leeks that look as beautiful as sort of church candles. That's the sort of dream. And then that's the longer leeks. And then you get the pot leek, which is the fat, stumpy one that's 150 ml of white. So there's two different types of leeks. But the method of coring out a hole with the drain pipe can be used for parsnips or long beetroot or carrots. But yeah, leeks is another story, another area.
There's a question here for Rachel. There's about how do we encourage children to become more engaged with showing?
Well, I think a lot of it is back to what Charlie said when he was a kid, that the school gets involved with it. The school encourages kids to do things, and the school. And if you live in a small rural community, it's part of the cycle of the school year where the village show is part of the village life, and everybody takes part, and every child does something they take along. And when my children were small, we had we're lucky enough to have one of the committee members on our flower show was a school teacher, so she made sure that every child in that school, there were only about 100 of them, but every child produced something that they took down to the tent on the day. It's harder these days as the curriculum is such that the teachers are so constrained by what they can actually add in to what they've got to do, that it's difficult to give them extra stuff. But some things like if you take in a potato in a bucket, give it to a class, get them to grow that, then they bring that and each class competes against the other, or take in some sunflower seeds and some pots and some soil, get each child to pot up a sunflower seed, take it home, grow it, take a photograph of the resulting plant and enter that. Try to get the school involved in some way, because that's the only way I think you can really reach out to a lot of children. Parents don't have a lot of time these days. The time at weekends is precious. They're both parents working. It's much harder now for parents and children to have time. Whereas, as you said, Charlie, now it's people say, it's my grandfather, I gardened with my grandfather. Yeah, I gardened with my grandparents, because they have the time to spend with their grandchildren doing these things, whereas parents don't. So it's, but then again, families are more widely dispersed than they used to be, so they don't necessarily have that connection. So it's trying to find a route in to getting the child's interest. And I think getting the schools involved, if it's possible, is one of the best ways. But it's finding the right route in, and not overburdening the teachers who are overburdened anyway.
Yeah.
We do, Rachel, we do have children's classes, don't we, at the show? And even this year, we tried to, even with no show, we ran our own little mini competition of a garden on a plate for children. So we are trying our best to engage with them. But perhaps any comment about the children's classes at the show?
Well, they're always, I think they're one of the best things, because they are always so enchanting. When you look at the gardens they produced, and you can see that the thoughts that are behind what they've tried to put into their vegetable gardens and their little houses and their little people in the gardens, and the animals made from vegetables and that sort of thing. It's one of the things that everybody loves to go and look at. So it's always a joy to go and see those classes, because they are the most interesting. And if you can write encouraging notes, and always give a highly commended to a child who hasn't got first, second, and third, so that they're encouraged to carry on with doing things and then hopefully carry on with growing.
Yeah, when I was back in New Zealand in March to actually go, and I was going to my show, which I was brought up with, and I was seeing all my family and stuff, and I was lucky enough to be judging the children's section at the show, which was great, because they needed someone to come and judge. But I was also really, the great thing was I was asked to go and show the children at two of Mayfield School, and then there's one up the road called Mount Somers, to show them just a couple of things. There was the 5-flower arrangement and the sand saucer, and I just showed them very quickly how you can do a sand saucer and a 5-flower arrangement. And then that afternoon at school they were all doing that, and then in the evening the teachers brought them down to the show. So there was sort of and it's amazing, because then suddenly a class which could have 3 entries. I mean, it had like 60 entries in it, which is just like insane and really encouraging.
Yeah, and a lot of schools do have space now where they do grow their own vegetables. So trying to incorporate that into something that they can then take from their vegetable garden at school and bring it into the show. It's difficult. One of the things that is quite tricky is the timing, because if you don't get the show just after the end of the school year, if it's like a lot of shows are in August, the kids have left school, they're on holiday, and you've missed that sort of window of enthusiasm where you've still got the stuff at school and you're taking it into the show. Whereas if your show is 3 or 4 weeks later, it's the child's mind has moved on. So it's getting the timing right.
Well, related to that, of course, not just to the horticulture section, we at the show have got all sorts of initiatives with children, with our Discover Farming tent at the show, and the classroom that we have at Washing Pool Farm. And I don't know, Charlie, or Caddy, or any of you who knew about that, about all the classes that we run, which is fantastic. We have this, we bought a classroom, and it's at Washing Pool Farm, and we have lessons there about how to grow all sorts of things and all basic things of farming, which is all obviously related to what we're talking about. Specific question I've had in for Caddy is, how did you get into showing?
I was a very keen beekeeper. I was given a beehive when I was 12. So there was a lovely old man locally who helped me, and I was a very keen beekeeper, and I still am. I always have been. And then suddenly, when I was living in London, when I was in my 20s, I suddenly realised there was the National Honey Show in Kensington Town Hall, which was pretty odd. But anyway, I won a prize for black honey in the National Honey Championships. So that when I got the certificate, that was it. I sort of saw the pleasure of that. And then when we came here, Melplash has been focused since.
The rest of the, I've got a number of questions. People, Charlie, want you to talk about anything other you want to say about dahlias.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many things you can say about dahlias. That's the thing. I mean, if you want to grow dahlias, or if you are growing dahlias, the one key thing which a lot of people, amateurs that have just started growing dahlias, which I can completely sympathize with because I did it when I started growing them, is it's really, really important to stake them. Because any bit of rain or wind or anything, they'll literally just snap. And then that's that. So there are so many different methods of staking dahlias. I mean, if I gave a small tutorial on my Instagram, which is probably easier to look at than me explaining it. But I mean, that's one important thing. I mean, if you just want to grow them for picking, I mean, they're amazing because the more you pick, the more they come. I mean, it's important to feed them early in the season. I feed them on sort of chicken manure, and then put a bit of muck on them. And then later in the season, I just give them a bit of a spray with some seaweed. I mean, I don't know what else someone... I don't know if that's helped you or not, but I mean, it's really important that I've just seen this. It's really important that you get sort of good quality compost or muck or something that you know has got no chemicals in it, because I mean, at the moment there's a massive problem all over sort of the UK with this sort of chemical which is used to be sprayed on farms, which has ended up in all these composts. And people, I mean, especially this year, and I know people that grow dahlias and stuff who've had massive problems with this, where it basically just kills the plant. So it's really important to know your source of compost or muck. Like if you're getting it from a farmer, make sure that they're not sort of using a lot of chemicals, because some chemicals can really stunt the growth of your plants or just kill them, and that can be costly if you have to replace sort of 100 dahlias.
This is moving on from dahlias. This has got nothing to do with dahlias or anything really. The question is that Charlie, you said you have the National Collection of Ground Elder. if so, how do you deal with it? Any special tips, or just digging it out endlessly? Obviously, from somebody who is that's a rather tired and emotional comment, I think.
Oh, well, I mean, luckily my sort of my national collection of ground elder and sort of bits of the garden, which are sort of more wild areas. So I try and contain it to those areas. But if I mean, I think the only way of really getting rid of it is digging it out. Unless Caddy or Rachel have another method, but unless you want to use chemicals, but if you want to sort of do it organically, I think that's the only way. Or I don't know if the sort of no dig method works, of covering it in cardboard and then covering it in compost. I don't know if Caddy or Rachel have any.
I don't know much about it really.
There are areas, if you go to Wisley at the moment, there are areas where they've got real problems with ground elder, and what they are doing is just that they're taking all the plants out, covering it with black plastic, and waiting till it grows through, and then digging out, and they've just basically cleared the beds until they've got it free. Because, as you say, if you don't want to use chemicals, if you don't want to use glyphosate or anything like that, that is really the only way to do it. And sadly, with digging, you've only got to break the root once, leave a little bit behind, and you've got a whole new plant. So they're really hard to get out.
Yeah, if anyone wants to volunteer to come and dig mine up, it's more than welcome.
I don't think the questionnaire offered anything. They were just obviously, rather, as I say, a tired and emotional, rather a plea, I think. The next question is from a Charlie McCormick. It is to Rachel and Caddy, saying he's particularly, or he's got into growing large vegetables. As two judges, what things should he be looking out for? What things should he be ensuring that his large vegetables, what attributes should they have?
They should be heavy.
That's just big and heavy.
Yeah. They don't need to look beautiful. They just need to be heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of growing heavy, giant vegetables, is they just want to be heavy.
They can be as ugly as you like, as long as they're heavy.
And they're really easy to grow, so I really
You don't have to have a set either. You can just have the one.
Yeah.
Most other things you grow, you need to have a set of 6 beans or 9 tomatoes, and getting each of those to match is pretty hard. So, big veg are, I'm not saying they're easy, Charlie, but it's just one thing you're going for.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah. Remember that man who cut his in half and rode down the Thames in it? What do you do with it when it's out? What do you do it? What do you do with a big pumpkin?
Make a lot of pie or soup, if you're willing.
There's a question here to Charlie. Having grown one of these enormous vegetables, do you then take it round from show to show? So you've only really got one vegetable that wins rosettes or certificates at all the shows.
Well, there's no rules in not doing that. I mean, with my giant marrow, which I grew, I took it to Melplash and then I took it to Dorset County. But I grew 2 different pumpkins for both shows, because when you grow these veg, like as soon as you cut the fruit off the vine, they start losing weight like instantly, because basically they're mostly just water. So I think between the Melplash and the Dorset County, which are about 10 days apart, I guess 2 weeks, can't remember. The marrow had lost about 5 kgs. So, it's a risk you take, I guess. It just so happened that I only had 1 marrow plant that year. But if you have 2 marrow plants, or if you grow a set off one vine, you might be able to use 2 different fruits. But if you've got the giant veg, you might as well take it to as many shows as you can.
You've got to show off.
Certainly, I remember in Essex that there were a recognisable set of large onions going round, and after you've been to about the 6th show, you could recognise because they keep you recognise the set that travels.
I remember seeing a man after, I don't know who he was, but after the Melplash, around the back of the tent, when people were taking their exhibits away, there was a man who had it was a Jag or some fancy car, and he opened up the boot, and inside was like, it was filled with this sort of foam with little gouges out for, like you'd have in Christmas decorations. And he had all these onions that fitted in these little gouged out dips, and he was just driving his onions around the county in the back of his Jag.
I'm very mindful that, amazingly, our hour is nearly up. So I've just got one question, which is the same question to all of you. Have you got 3 tips that you want to pass on, your 3 really key tips that you want to pass on to people who are going to be interested in showing, either how to get into it or what to do if they're into it, or anything related to showing?
Just go for it. One thing once, and then you'll be, if you get any commendations, you'll be hooked. It's good fun, and you ought to just give it a go.
Well, I would say read the schedule. The schedule is the Bible. So if the schedule asks you for 5 stems of something and you've taken along a couple of spares, remember to take the couple of spares out. Same with things like beans. Your set of 6, you always take along a couple of extra ones, and you put them all on the bench, you line them up, and then you walk away and you forget to take away those 2 extra ones. So always read the schedule and count. Yeah. Count every time.
Yeah, it's so easy to make a mistake in that panic when you're entering so many things, and you're all hyped up about all these things you're putting out. Very easy to not count. And
give yourself plenty of time to
Yeah.
check things and just make sure you've got the right number in the right. It's always easy enough to take one away. You can always ask a steward to just check an exhibit, and if it's got 7 instead of 6, the steward can take one away. You can never add any, so you need to just make sure your numbers are right.
And I think if you want to start exhibiting, or if you think you exactly the same thing, is just don't overdo yourself. So just enter a couple of classes or one class, as don't try and enter sort of 20 classes, because
Like
that's when you sort of start to really stress out and think, oh, what am I doing? Why have I done this? Just enter a couple of classes for a start. And as you grow more confident, or then that's when you can start to talk to people who exhibit, and you'll start to learn, and they'll say, oh, can I send you some seed, or would you like some cuttings of this dahlia? And then and that's the joy of it, is because people who show are really willing to pass on information, but they're also really willing to pass on seeds and cuttings of all sorts of things. That's why it's such a sort of wonderful society. I mean, the Melplash Society plus all other sort of societies to be in, because there's these people with wealth of knowledge who just want to sort of extend it to other people.
Yeah, people are so generous with their time. That's I think they are willing to give you as much time as you've got to listen to them. They will give you.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thanking people for giving their time up, can I thank Rachel, Caddy and Charlie? You've been really, really helpful towards the show. Some lovely comments have just come in thanking you. So obviously on all the attendees' behalves, can I thank you? And as the person who's just emailed said, we've now brought global glory to Melplash Show with our gentleman from Chile. So that's really great.
Lovely.
So anyway, thank you all. We've got another webinar coming up on December the 10th, which is all going to be about local food and wine, well, and booze of all descriptions, I think. Primarily what to do for perhaps your alternative Christmas this year. So that's on December the 10th, and all information relating to that will be coming out very shortly. So can I again thank all the panelists, and thank you attendees for watching, and look forward to seeing you in a fortnight's time. Thank you all.
Right. Bye.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, bye.